You know, basically that goes back to the beginning when we first started using E10, when the renewable fuel standard came in. E10 received a 1 pound, what's called a 1 pound waiver in order to be used year round. Basically what it is, it's as you fill up your car, there's vapors that go into the air. And as the temperatures warm up, those vapors are greater. So we have what's called the Reid vapor pressure. And with E15, it actually has less vapor pressure than what E10 does, but yet it was restricted from being used in the summertime during those warmer months, whereas E10 we could use. So it was just one of those silly rules that needed to be done away with in the first place. You know, people talk about that it's polluting the air and contributing to smog by using E15. The truth is, it's the more ethanol you use, the lower that Reid vapor pressure becomes, the less vapors it's giving off. So really the cleaner our air is, plus the more ethanol you have in there, the cleaner the gasoline burns, plus the cleaner your engine is. And the emissions coming out of that tailpipe get cleaner and cleaner as you increase the use of ethanol.
We've got year-round sales of E15 in the works right now. What kind of effect is this going to have on the industry overall, and what's it mean for production and sales for the industry?
Initially, we're not going to see a big bump. We're not going to see a big bump in extra gallons of ethanol used, maybe 600, 700 million gallon, which, you know, every little bit helps to be able to use more. The reason for that is a lot of retailers have not moved forward to put in the infrastructure in order to be able to use E15. The reason why they didn't is because they couldn't sell it year-round. So now we've got that barrier out of the way. I think we're going to see more and more retailers start to offer it to their customers, because basically what they're doing is they're offering a fuel that is 5 to 10 cents cheaper and burns cleaner. So why not sell it as far as a retailer's goes to pull more customers in? But it's going to signal to them it's time to start moving forward with this better fuel, and we'll see more and more retailers start putting it in. And over a course of years, we'll see it contributing to a significant amount of gallons. If you want to look at it in a perfect sense, let's say that everything did switch from E10 to E15. And we know that's not going to happen overnight, but if it did, we'd be looking at another about 7.5 billion gallons of ethanol production. So it does have the potential of being a really big deal. But the nice part about it is it was simply a political win for ethanol, basically following up on a promise that President Trump made to the ethanol industry, saying we will get year-round E15.
Speaking of that, I mean, this doesn't seem like a 100% cut and dry victory for the ethanol industry. I mean, you're still contending with small fuel refineries applying for RINs and small refinery waivers, and they're still coming in large numbers. How does that negate any gains that could be made in the short term for you guys?
Well, small refinery waivers, or excuse me, small refinery exemptions are something that was written into the renewable fuel standard to help small refineries as we've started ramping up the renewable fuel standard in 2005 and then again in 2007. It was never meant to exempt the amount of refineries that it is today. So basically what the law says is that any refinery that produces less than 75,000 barrels per day of fuel can request an exemption from the RFS and not have to blend ethanol in. Through the years, they've been used very little, and they were used for justifiable reasons. Here lately, for 2016 and 2017, the EPA has been approving just about every exemption that's requested. Now, they are all refineries that are under that 75,000 barrels per day, but many of them are tied in with large conglomerates that are making billions of dollars in profits off of the driving consumer. So why should the farmers that are providing the corn for these ethanol plants take that hit when they're in dire straits right now economically, and we have these conglomerations that are making billions of dollars, the oil companies, I'll just come out and say it, the oil companies that are making billions of dollars in profits, and they're requesting these exemptions. It just does not make sense. For 2016 and 2017, the exemptions that were put out by the EPA has been a cut in 2.6 billion gallons. For 2018, there's right at about 40 exemptions waiting. that the EPA has not approved yet. If they were to approve all those, we would be hurting really bad in number of gallons that would not be blended in to the fuel supply in the United States.
I mean, like right now, I believe there's 50 or so stations in Nebraska that are capable of selling E15.
There's 48 stations that can sell E15 right now in
Okay.
Nebraska.
And I guess you probably touched on this before, but do you think that's primarily just because they weren't able to sell year-round, or are there other infrastructure problems that they'd have to deal with?
There can be other infrastructure problems too, depending upon what that retailer wants to do. Most of the time what we like to see is when a retailer does that is to put in what's called the blender pumps, so that way they can offer all blends of ethanol. So we have over 250,000 of flex fuel vehicles running around the roads in Nebraska. In Nebraska alone, 250,000 flex fuel vehicles that can burn anything from E10 to E85. So as these retailers put in the infrastructure, what we like to see is them put in the infrastructure to be able to handle all blends of ethanol, which also then sets them up for the future. Now though, since E15 has been approved year-round, we want to see, we're okay with retailers just putting in E15 only to offer to their customers, and that costs a lot less. To put in, depending upon their setup, it can oftentimes cost $100,000 or more to put in the infrastructure to offer those higher ethanol blends. For E15, oftentimes there's very little has to be done at that retailer, but the fallacy that's out there is that retailers think, oh, well, if I go to E15, I'm going to have to spend over $100,000 to put this in. And that's oftentimes not the case. So we want retailers to explore what it would take for them to put E15 in so they can start getting at the same place that the early adopters were with E15 and offering their consumers, their customers, a cheaper fuel at a better price. Excuse me, I need to, didn't say that right. It needs to be a better fuel at a less cost, not a cheaper fuel at less. Yeah.
More cost effective.
Cost effective, there you go. Yep.
Can you kind of talk a little bit about how that ties in with RINs and how they differ and how they're tied together?
Yeah, basically what a RIN is the mechanism that was brought about when Congress set the renewable fuel standard up in 2005 and then again in 2007. The RIN is basically the mechanism that enforces the renewable fuel standard. So when a gallon of ethanol is produced, 1 RIN goes along with that. So an oil company that decides that they do not want to blend ethanol can buy RINs, is what they can do. And so it's that purchase of RINs is where the oil companies come in and say it's costing our industry too much. Even though they're making billions of dollars, they say it's costing our industry too much, so we're going to put in for a small refinery exemption so that we don't have to buy those RINs. The funny thing about it though is that all they have to do is set up the infrastructure to blend ethanol. And then they can take advantage of a whole new market rather than digging their heels in and just trying to sell straight gasoline, which very few people use anymore, because who wants to pay 30 cents a gallon more for straight gasoline when you can get E10 or E15, which is a better fuel for less cost in there. So that's kind of where RINs come in.
How would you say the automotive industry has dealt with the implementation of biofuels, and are they becoming, I guess, a little more accommodating to the ethanol industry than previous years?
I think we're about the same place. No, let me change that. I think they are becoming a little more accommodating. When it comes to E15, almost all manufacturers now have approved E15 for warranty purposes in their vehicles. I think over 90% of the auto manufacturers worldwide now do approve the use of E15. So in that aspect, yes, we're seeing the autos much more accepting of ethanol. They understand that it's good for those engines, that it keeps those engines clean. I have worked in the past few years with an organization called the Ag Auto Ethanol Working Group, which is just as it says. It's a conglomeration of agricultural organizations, of ethanol producers and organizations, and of the auto manufacturers, looking at future production of vehicles. Where autos would like to go is to an automobile called the low carbon drivetrain. What we have found is that ethanol has a sweet spot for these engines, which is between 25 and 30% blend, where they can make an engine that has a much higher compression, and by using that octane that's in ethanol, because that's what ethanol is octane, and then when you're sitting at that 25 to 30% ethanol blend, the octane is just perfect for a higher compression engine. You don't have that knock that you would normally hear if you use a gas, a cheap gas. We used to call it bad gas. You'd be going down the road and your engine would be knocking like crazy, and that's hard on an engine.
Oh, yeah.
That's very hard on an engine. Ethanol gives that octane to keep it from knocking. So the higher you take the compression of an engine, the more octane you need, but the higher you take the compression of the engine, the more efficient it becomes too. So that is where autos are looking at this higher compression engine to bring about those efficiencies. And the cheapest octane source out there, and the most readily available octane source out there, is ethanol.
So we deal with markets a lot on the show, so I got to come out and ask. We've had tariffs with China, threatened tariffs against Mexico, trade disputes, more than I can follow. Has this had any at all impact on the ethanol industry?
Of course, here lately, with corn prices going up, it is having some effect. Right now, the price of ethanol is following the price of corn up. So the margins at our ethanol plants have improved a little bit over what they were in last winter when prices were so low for ethanol. You know, we could get into a situation like we were in 2012 when we were dealing with drought and had a very short crop. That's not good for anybody to see prices of corn go up to $8. But right around $5, between $4.50 and $5 is a spot where the farmer does well, and ethanol plants can still operate on that too. So that's what we hope for in any industry. You don't want to see any part of an industry hurting. So we always hope that the price of corn will be to the point to where the farmer is making good money and to where the ethanol plants are having the returns that they also need and having a good return on their investment also.
And the last question I had, again, deals with China, but they are, I think I read this a couple months ago, but last month might have changed in the time since I read it, but from what I understand, China is set to implement a very large mandate on ethanol use in the country there. How big a boost would that be for the market, and how big of a loss would that be if we're still not negotiating?
Well, it's a loss right now because we are not selling any gallons of ethanol to China. Before, China was one of our largest customers for ethanol until the tariffs came in and started disrupting our flow of ethanol to China. If we could get past the trade problems that we have right now, especially with China starting to mandate E10, I think they would be an extremely big customer again. And exports of ethanol are huge to the ethanol industry here in the United States. Our ethanol plants are not producing at maximum capacity right now. They have more capacity they could put out and handle higher blends here in the United States, plus export too. Plus we have the corn that can be provided to do all that. So the person does not need to worry about whether we would have enough feedstocks for the ethanol plants. And having said that, that would still provide enough for our livestock industry, plus the exporting that we do of simply corn, not in the ethanol form, but corn itself. So we raise enough corn in a normal year to handle all those industries. So to get rid of the tariffs that we have with China would be huge to the ethanol industry. I think we'd be looking at several billion gallons possibly that we would see increase in our exports worldwide if the China tariffs would come off.
Yeah, I think what I've read is anywhere between 3 to 6 billion gallons. So
is what they were.
that's quite the projection.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, that they would use internally.
Yep.
Yeah. You know, over the years, ethanol's really gotten a bad rap, and it's been proliferated by those who oppose ethanol with basically just outright lies. And I like to tell people, aren't you tired of getting lied to? We now know that ethanol is not going to ruin your engine. We're running state vehicles in a test program with E30. Those cars haven't died along the side of the road. And we know at the end of the test, those engines are going to be cleaner and better off for it. So ethanol is a very clean burning octane is what it is, which what that octane does then, no matter what blend you're using, it helps the gasoline burn even more clean than what it would on its own. That way, as we're walking down the streets, close to traffic, we're breathing less of what's called particulate matter that comes out of our tailpipes. We have a lot of what's called 2.5 particulate matter that we breathe in, and that is such a small amount of particulate matter, it's smaller than a hair on your head, that it can be absorbed right in, it goes right into your lungs and then can be absorbed into the bloodstream. And these are toxic. They're toxic because a lot of what's coming out of our tailpipes that oil uses for octane is benzene, toluene, and xylene. Benzene is a known carcinogen. And we pump that out of every automobile running up and down the roads. So there again, the more ethanol you use, the less of that toxic stuff you're putting out your tailpipe, the less of it that we're breathing. And really, who doesn't like clean air? I like the idea of when I go for a walk and I'm around traffic, I don't have to hold my breath. Have you ever tried to hold your breath while you're walking? It doesn't work very well. It's hard to do. So I like to breathe clean air, and I know everybody else does too. And the nice part about it, the more ethanol you use, the less cost it has for you, and the more money you're going to keep right in your pocket.